Hey, it's Sid with Table Talk with Sid Features. Again, I'm back with Dawni Angel, the practical mystic, and Reverend Jody. And we haven't gotten together for a little bit, but this subject we're going to talk about today is, I think, will hit home for a lot of people because it's very common. It's labels. Labels that are tossed around seems to be freely all the time. And how labels can affect your life. What to do about labels, how to deal with them, and how to maneuver maybe around them and with them. I'm going to just tell you what brought this subject up for me. So I've been out of town, I feel like for a century, but nevertheless it's been for a little bit. My daughter went on her soccer tournament. She's extremely good. Okay, sometimes you really want people to excel, and then there comes a point where I'm like, oh, maybe that was an error because this is sure getting expensive
and time
consuming. But nevertheless, okay, so she's excelled and she's extremely good at soccer, but we've hit a little plateau which is, I think, is common within the age of questioning who they are, what your abilities are, your self-worth, all of these things. And so her level of play has come down. Now again, I'm at so many things because soccer's been my life since I was little that you see it. It's just common. But you know, we've had a discussion with her coach, love her coach. She's going to a sports psychologist, to help manage the stress of it because there is a lot. These kids, it is high pressure. Those schools they're scouting early. It's crazy. They're scouting so early. And the pressure to perform, all of these things. So my child has always been first string. Well, then she went into high school and something happened in high school because she quit performing. Somewhere, someplace, somehow, somebody informed her, because she's always been one of the very fastest. She's a left winger and she can shoot like no other. So she's a hot commodity. Well, somewhere and I want everyone to hear that, this little soul decided to believe a label, right? She decided, because we have to remember labels and crap are thrown around all the time. But just because things are thrown around doesn't mean
it has to stick.
You own it.
I'm glad you brought it up because as soon as you said that, the first thing that came to my mind is we take on a lot of labels. We have to decide what we want to take on.
That is correct. And this little person, right? So now she went from first string to sitting on the bench, and she's transferred that emotional thing over with her to her P1 team. That's the team that's scouted, okay? So she's transferred it over, and guess where she's sitting? On the bench.
So what was the label? What were they saying?
For the first thing that slid into wherever it came from, into her head, is that she's not fast enough any longer to be one of the fastest, which is a false statement. That she can no longer shoot, so she should only pass, which is a false statement. Because you go watch the kid in practice, and it's all there, right? Everything that she's always done is there. You put her out on the field, and you see her shrink. But this is where I'm a little frustrated, and I'm breathing, because the object, at least what I believe as a parent, is this opportunity to help your children refocus, rearrange, and to really learn that value of stand up. That label doesn't fit me. It doesn't fit me. Stand up, brush it off, wash your hands. And what label am I owning? The truth about me, because her P1 team, she is sitting on the bench, and the coach called her to my face that she is a sub now. Well, that word sub, right? She has
less than. Actually, that's what it means. Like you're a
subhuman. You are less than. That's correct. And unfortunately, because she's already been plagued with her own beliefs that she's chosen to own, now she hears the word sub, and so she plays like a sub. However, her very last game, the entire team had gotten in trouble. So the first lineup got in trouble, so they're on the bench. So the subs went in, and I'm doing the little bunny ears.
Air quotes.
Air quotes, yeah.
Because who goes in, and who is the only player who scores? Her. Who is the only player that keeps the ball down the field? Her. But she struggles, and it's not just her being 15. I think this is a community thing. She's struggling because all she can do is talk to me about, yeah, Mom, but I didn't do this and I didn't do that, and this is why I've been on the bench. And what I want us to address, because you ladies are great at this, for everyday people, because a 45-year-old, a 35-year-old, a 15-year-old, they're struggling with it, on why you choose to own what you choose to own, and why an individual, because I believe I have answers for my own self, but I think it's valuable to hear the discussion. Here she's been such a brilliant athlete for years and years, first string, and now for some reason she's chosen to believe she's a sub. I think I started with you, Jody, last time. I'll start with you, Dawni. So I want you to give some brilliant feedback, ladies, on how people should choose to own what they own and how they choose what is not truth about them.
Okay, so this is a very personal and somewhat tender subject for me, because I'm someone that throughout my life has not necessarily taken on a lot of labels or been that worried what other people thought. And recently, in going through this divorce, it has been difficult for me because this is my third divorce.
Okay.
Right? So you think about someone, even if you're someone who's not normally judgmental, and you hear just the fact about me. Say you two ladies didn't know me at all. So, oh, Donnie's been divorced 3 times. Instantly, there's sort of a label there. There's an idea that maybe I'm flaky,
Sure.
emotionally unstable, but knowing me,
Sure.
right? I'm not at all flaky or emotionally unstable. So one of the reasons I stayed in the marriage as long as I did, which is, I'm not the only one, right, is because I couldn't bear to have it be that much of a failure, quote unquote. I'm also doing air quotes, a lot of air quotes happening today, to other people. See, I know the whole story. I know my reasons. So here's what has made the difference for me, because I've been a little bit tortured over the last couple of months, to the point where I was actually putting off and procrastinating filing the divorce, even though I'm completely out, moved out, financially untangled, 100% done. But it was the paperwork, and I thought, I'm sure giving a lot of power to a signature on a page. And so I realized 2 things. So one thing I think that's really powerful to do with labels is to deconstruct them. Let's tell the truth about them. So, I had lunch with a dear lifelong friend yesterday, and we were talking about this subject, and I said, he's never been married. He has someone he lives with.
There's a label.
Exactly.
Right.
For the last 10 years, they have a child together, and he has another child from someone else, but he's never been married.
Because I'm going to assume he's not 20.
No, he's not 20.
Okay.
He's 44.
There you go. Okay.
And so I said, but basically, for all intents and purposes, you've also been divorced 3 times. You've had 3 different women you lived with, and then it didn't work out, and you moved out. There just wasn't signatures on paper. So that was important to me, to deconstruct that label and realize how much of it is arbitrary. It's not real. This is just, these are words that we put meaning to. So that's been really powerful. But here's the second part. And this is where it gets tricky and a little bit emotional for me, probably because I'm in it right now. But there's a piece of me that's like, you know what? I do own this, but I own it on my terms, right? So what that means for me is I take full accountability for my choices, for what I have engaged in, for my peace in getting into the relationship itself, and also getting out of the relationship. Because the truth is, I'm not a victim. In all 3 of my marriages, I was the one who chose out. And for what I consider to be very good reasons, but that doesn't matter. I don't have to defend those reasons to anyone else, or even to myself at this point.
Right.
So it's the ownership.
Right.
It's an accountability piece. It's not ownership in a negative way, like that now defines me. it's not a
It's like
definition of me.
ownership for stepping stones.
Yes, it's
education, knowledge,
and for
wisdom.
choice. You can't unchoose what you can't see that you chose.
Right.
And so for me, I say there's a piece of me that wants to come in and defend myself. If you knew me, listen, I'm someone who's really got my act together. I'm not what I sound like, but I don't need to do that.
Correct.
My life itself stands for itself.
Yeah.
So for me, the label thing has come down to deconstructing what it even means, realizing how much of it is arbitrary, and then being accountable. You see, this isn't something I hide.
Right.
I'm not ashamed of this. If I was always trying to keep my mouth shut about it and trying to pretend that it never happened, then I'm not taking accountability for what my life has actually been. And it can be something, me saying I've been divorced 3 times can be like me saying I love coffee, or, I like that piece of art. It's just a statement.
Right.
It doesn't have to mean all of the shame and the pain that I myself have put behind that statement. So, Sid, back to your daughter, her being like, well, right now I'm a substitute, which I would say the full word because the word sub is really a negative kind of feeling. And owning her piece of that, right? So saying, I did honestly stop playing up to my potential, which haven't we all?
Yeah.
Did you know?
At some point, yes.
In whatever area of life, and then say, and now what?
And you know what's so beautiful, and I'll get to you, Jody, in just a second, is that I was very impressed with her because she had a little emotional breakdown about 2 days ago, and I've never seen her this way. And I said, okay, we're going to talk about options, options of maybe you've been here too long. She's been doing this year-round since the age of 6. Maybe it's time to do something different. Maybe it's time to take a break. All of these things. And that little thing sat back and she goes, Mom, guess what? I go, what, baby? She says, I am not scoring like I usually score. I am not being aggressive like I'm usually being aggressive. And she said, for some reason, I can't get my body and mind to do it. And she says, so I want to go get extra coaching. And I love this because she was problem solving. I want to go get extra coaching, not just from my sports psychiatrist, but also from a professional. He's from RSL, from a professional player that can guide my skill. And I thought, isn't that beautiful? Because she loves the sport so much that she took responsibility, because that was part of our discussion. With everything that happens, we have some responsibility to take.
And if we don't own it, we'll go into victim mode.
That's
which
right.
will then further our regression in that downward spiral.
That's correct.
Well, I've got to say, though, we got to take a look at what we're owning, though, because a lot of the labels come down to other people's perception. And I have a funny story on this note. So I interviewed my grandson on my radio show, and I did a show called Sex Through the Eyes of a 7-year-old. Now, before we did this, I prepped him. Well, not prepped him, but I did a test run to see what he would say. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he tells me that, sex is for married people. And so I'm, okay. And I said, well, do you think Grandma has sex? And he said, yes.
Jody, I love you.
And I said, well, Grandma's not married. How does Grandma have sex? And he says, you have a lot of husbands. I went, oh my gosh, what is this kid thinking? Okay, so he's never been around when I've gone to go on a date or anything else. And I'm going, where is this kid getting this from? Mm-hmm. But what I realized is there were times where I was babysitting him, and bless their heart, I'd take a business meeting and we'd do it at McDonald's so that my grandson could go play on the playground, and then me and whomever I was meeting with, we could sit at a table and we could have our business meeting. And what I realized is all of those business meetings were with men. Mm-hmm. And so all these guys, in my grandson's perceptions, they were my husbands.
Oh!
Wow,
You have a lot of husbands.
But it was so funny to sit and analyze, how he could see this thing. And I was just in utter confusion at first. But my point in telling you that story is that we don't have to take on other people's perceptions.
Yes.
You know, we can take a look at it and see where they're seeing things.
Right.
You know, in fact, Byron Katie says that everything that you can say about anybody else, somebody can say about you.
Correct.
So, you know, that gives us a good opportunity to examine what people say about that and where it can be true and where we want to actually own that.
Right.
We don't have to own any of it shit.
Correct.
Well, that's and that's kind of what I was speaking to. For me, it's like I'm not owning a shame. I am saying in real life, I've had 3 marriages, which I've left, right? So it's almost owning kind of the factual piece of that, but not owning the shame of it.
Yeah.
And mostly what I mean too by owning it is not trying to hide it.
Correct.
Transparency is extremely important to me in the work I do. And also, how powerful is it if somebody who doesn't fit the stereotype, because that's another way to say labels, right? I'm not someone who fits the stereotype of someone who's been divorced 3 times.
Right.
There's some power in that because it almost forces people to look at their perceptions and start to break them down. And it can also be, I've had a lot of other people reach out to me. Thank you for being so honest about that. I've also had multiple divorces and it's been very hard for me to speak to. But the fact that I'm sort of almost like just normal and casual about it makes it easier for them, which Jody's very similar to what you do with your work, is because you don't have any shame about sexuality. It creates it so other people can have permission to own their stuff. So I agree with you completely. I think we need to be careful. Are we owning other people's perceptions or are we just being accountable for the factual piece?
Yeah, you know, there's this guy named Jay Shetty out there. He's phenomenal. He's picked up by the Huffington Post, and he has done, so he's, instead of being a journalist, they brought him on because he's like a videographer, giving perception to what a journalist would, but in the eyes of the good, the visual, how we get around it. And he has this one about failure. And I absolutely love it because he talks about the fact that we as a community are so focused on success that we've devalued the value of the journey, that the journey of hard work, overcoming, falling down, standing up, brushing off, moving on, education, making a wrong turn, but then making the right turn. And then he talks about, for Walt Disney, for example, how Walt Disney, no one believed in him, thought he was just a throwaway artist. Finally, there was this church priest that believed in him and put him in the back room, and he was back there painting and drawing, and all of a sudden he saw a mouse run across the floor. That was the beginning of Mickey Mouse. And same with the President Lincoln. You know, he's lost 8 times. His fiance died. He has lost in business time and time again, and no one sees that those things that happened, everyone sees them as failure, when really that was his education to getting him to be one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. So like what we speak to you, Dawni, with the challenge, people are looking at the 3 divorces, not at the education and the wisdom and the things you've owned.
Oh, I'm a relationship expert now. I mean, truly, like I'm not just joking about that, right? 2 of those marriages were long-term marriages. The amount of wisdom that I gained is priceless. And because this is what I do for a living, is helping other people, I'm able to share a lot of that. It is taking those, it's turning labels into stepping stones.
Correct.
There's a way to transmute what's happening here. We're given a label, we deconstruct that label, we're accountable for the piece of it that's true, and then we get to transmute that label into that nugget, that gold nugget, that wisdom, that stepping stone.
And that thing like the Oprah Winfrey, because she was one of them where they said she would never add up to anything, wasn't pretty enough, wasn't thin enough.
Oh, tons of labels.
Wasn't light enough, right? All of these things. But she believed in herself, and she decided to, quote unquote, label herself. But what, those things that made her not as much, that's what made her so great. Because if she were all the other things that everyone said she would need to be, she'd just be another talk show host. But because she owned who she was, what she is, the value about herself. That's what has propelled her to greatness, regardless if we agree with her, right? Regardless if you love Oprah, it doesn't really matter. She has propelled herself to a level because she has owned all of these things, but with a beauty, not owned them like, oh gosh.
Not with the victim story, but with full accountability. And you almost get to a point where you're like, this has been my experience on this planet. And honestly, I love it. I have so many people have asked me, would you change it? Do you wish you could go back and change it?
I would never change anything.
Absolutely not.
Correct.
I'm both so thankful that it all happened and so thankful that I don't have to go back and do it again.
Yes. So thankful we're not 20 also.
Oh my word. Isn't it funny when you're in your 20s and you look at women in their 40s and you say, oh, those poor women past their prime, and we're over here going, oh, you poor little things having to go through that.
Oh, well, let's talk about prime. I was watching, I don't know.
Another label, by the way.
I don't know if it's Dateline or 60 Minutes or whatever, but it was fabulous because they were talking about this day and time, it was in 2016, where your prime label, but nevertheless I'll own this one, where your prime is. Being that American woman in her 40s, and they were talking about men also.
Yes, please.
But those 40s, from age 40 to 52, they said is prime real estate. Because you're no longer seen as young, without wisdom, without history, and you're not seen as old, fuddy-duddy, not up with the times. You are in your prime. People take you seriously. They know your value. They are willing to pay you money. And I'm like, okay, I'll own that one.
Agreed.
Okay, maybe we're starting to just come into where we're accepting this now. But let me tell you what. Go back to Napoleon Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich.
One of my favorites.
And he does address how that when people really come into their own and start to really make their mark on the world, it's when they're in their 40s and 50s.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I mean, how lucky are we to be there right now? This is fucking awesome.
I lived this when I was at lunch with my friend yesterday. So I'm 47 and he's 44, and we've known each other since we were 6 and 9. He's the first boy I ever kissed.
Oh,
I mean,
my
he's my little
gosh.
childhood sweetheart. Love this man with every fiber of my being. And he's a snowboarder. We were talking about how good we feel. We were saying, now it's like I've got some money, I've got some knowledge, I have my friends, I have this life, and I still feel amazing.
Yeah.
I still feel good, I feel healthy, I feel strong. And even looking back at how I used to look, I actually like the way I look now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I look better now than I ever did when I was younger.
I think it's really beautiful, and this kind of goes back to that ownership. And I have a lot of friends my age, oh, I'm getting old. Yeah. They're kind of going into that story. We label ourselves. Yeah. We may as well choose labels that really work for us.
Right.
It's not even that the word label is a negative or a bad thing, but it is being aware of how we're using it.
That's correct.
And are we choosing it, or are we just at the mercy of what society has conditioned us to believe about ourselves?
And let's just talk just really quickly about society. Majority of people cannot manage their own life, their own feelings, their own ability to become whatever it is they choose to be. Yet, people are throwing these labels and whatever else you want to call it. And all of us are standing back like a chalkboard and taking on the chalk, which is bizarre to me because if I want to be a surgeon, I'm not going to go get educated by a welder.
Right.
So if these people are throwing these quote-unquote labels at you, you must look. Who are they? What's their life?
Consider the source.
Yes. How many life tools do they really own? Have they ever used those tools? Or they've just been locked up in that tool?
Well, you can decide how you want to take it on, too. I mean, I went into a coffee shop one day where a lot of my friends go. And it was kind of funny. A lot of people would take offense to this, but for me it was perfect. I walk in, and it was just like I was walking into Cheers and I was Norm. One of the guys yelled out, "Hey, look, it's our favorite masturbator." Yeah, and I was like, okay. So a lot of people could take offense by that. And I was just like,
Okay.
recognize.
It's absolutely true. I've had, not quite that title. But I've had several things happen where it was like they would say things about me that I know other people wouldn't love, but for me, that's who I am. We all have our brand. We all have our experience here. Why would we not fully own that?
Absolutely. It's what makes us beautiful, whether people like it or not. Those little quirks about a person, the little things that sometimes you have to take a breath, the things that you go, I would never do that. Yet she can pull it off.
Right.
That is what makes you amazing. It's what sets you apart from everyone else. And if more people could really find, cherish, own, and love that about themselves, they will find there are going to be fewer times they will be stressed. Fewer times they will feel, quote unquote, depression. Fewer times they will feel less than, because that's the brilliance about who you are.
You're also way less likely to take on what other people are throwing at you because you have something there. I feel like a lot of times when we take it on, it's because we're sort of struggling ourselves or empty, or we don't
little
really
empty.
know who we are. But when we're standing strong in it, which is another kind of difference a lot of times between us being in our 40s and 20s, at least for me,
Absolutely,
right?
no.
But when you're standing strong in it and someone says, you are this person, you actually have enough space in your emotional, well-being that where you can say, is that true? You can actually look at it for a minute.
Correct.
And then you can say, you can choose whether you accept that or you say, actually, that doesn't even resonate for me, but you're welcome to think whatever you want, and you go on with your day.
Correct.
You're not even slowed down by it because you know who you are.
Yes.
And because you've owned who you are. So I think ultimately that's what it comes down to.
Yes.
Is it's not going to stick if we already have something there. And it doesn't mean it's not flexible and changeable. We change our identities throughout our whole life. It's not about it being rigid, but it is about us being accountable for it and loving it. Why would we be doing something we don't love?
Correct.
Why would we, if we really are not happy with who we've become, then we can look at that and start to shift.
Correct.
That's the interesting thing is we can take these labels or what people say about us and we can choose what to do with them. I'm in a situation where the last few months I've been working with a group where I've always loved criticism because I think it helps me improve, but this group will not allow criticism at all. So, we'll take one person, we'll analyze their situation, and every person has to say what was wonderful about that person. And it's so interesting to listen to other people's perspectives of how wonderful you are and, in certain areas where your strengths are, and to be able to take a look at that and say, hey, yeah, I am strong in that area, and start to focus on those wonderful areas about you. I keep going, give me criticism, I want to improve, but we don't focus on that. We focus on all the good things. But it's just wonderful to hear the good perceptions that people have about you and to be able to own those things.
Right.
And when we're not afraid of labels, we're open to do that. There may be a label that someone's saying that actually we choose and we like. And so I don't want to make this a black and white subject, but it does, for me, come back down to awareness and accountability.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in your day, you may fall down, stand up, brush off, and move on. We'll talk to you.